And I'm going to ask Clarissa now if she can join us, and she's going to introduce our speaker for tonight.
Can everyone hear me? Yeah, kind of frozen. Okay, so we'd like to welcome Callum McKinven to our meeting tonight. He co-owns and operates Lookout Holsteins and Jerseys with his wife, Kathy, and 3 daughters, Tara, Brooke, and Alana. They're in Canton de Hatley, hopefully I said that right, Quebec. They raise over 200 head and are milking 35 cows. The McKinven family is active in showing and marketing animals in North America and around the world. The farm has garnered many All-Canadian and All-American awards in the Holstein, Jersey, and Brown Swiss breeds. Mr. McKinven is a Canadian official judge who is internationally renowned around the world for all breeds. He is judged in so many different places like Ireland, Japan, Australia, and many more. In North America, he has judged every major show, including judging multiple times the National Black and White Holstein Show at the Royal Agricultural Winter Fair. And he's also judged the Ayrshires, Jerseys, Brown Swiss at the Royal. Mr. McKinven has judged the World Dairy Expo 11 times and has also officiated both the Showmanship and Confirmation at the TD Classic, as well as the former President's Cup Showmanship competition. In addition to his judging and showing accomplishments, he was the recipient of the Curtis Clark Award presented at the Royal Winter Fair and the A.C. Whitty Thompson Memorial Award at the World Dairy Expo, both of which are selected by fellow breeders and exhibitors and presented to someone exemplifying all-around ability, sportsmanship, and dedication. So we're very lucky to have a person with Mr. McKinven's strong knowledge of the dairy industry, hands-on experience, and his true passion for dairy show cattle speaking to our group today.
Excellent, thanks Clarissa, and Callum, over to you. Oh, I think Callum, you're on mute.
Am I on mute? Oh,
there you go. You're good now.
Oh,
yes.
Okay. I don't know what happened. I didn't touch anything. Anyway, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here, and hoping we can, you guys ask lots of questions. I'll give you just a little bit of history of us here at the farm. My wife and I and my daughters have always been extremely active in the 4-H program. We've all my wife and I went through when we were younger. Our daughters have been very active, and now they've grown up and they're all out of it. So my wife and I have a grandchild coming in July. So I guess down the road, we'll be starting back up with that program in a few years, but it's sure nice to be asked to talk tonight. I guess I'll just tell you, we're kind of people that we like all breeds. You see, we have the Jerseys, the Holsteins, and the Brown Swiss. I've had Ayrshires. I've even owned a Guernsey. I guess for me, a good one is a good one, regardless of the breed and the color. And but specifically, we're very involved in the Holstein and Jersey breeds mostly. The question you guys were giving the answer to, what you do to make the success with your animal. You basically touched all the aspects. There's a few things that I think are really important. I'll add into there. Hoof trimming. Hoof trimming is really important, and I'm not saying you guys yourselves have to hoof trim them, but get somebody that's knowledgeable on hoof trimming. That can change an animal so much at a young age if you keep on top of doing a good job with the feet, having somebody who knows what they're doing. That's one thing that we're very picky on here. Also, vaccinations, you brought that up a lot. Yeah, I think vaccinations are a big part of the success. You need to have a program for your vaccinations. We ourselves, we're just on Triangle 10 here at the farm twice a year, and we do the boosters. We also, when we go to a show, a long trip, we'll give them Enforce up the nose. We feel that this covers them for that long trip if they're going off to World Dairy Expo or to Toronto or going to 4-H show far away. The calves, we'll give them Enforce. And we've been pretty lucky with not having a lot of problems. I think that that's a big thing that is very important. Now, what I want to say is not everybody have the same ways. Not everybody have the same facilities. And I think it's important that you do the best with what facility you have for your animals. And ourselves here, we have not a great place for show heifers, to be honest with you, but we've had a lot of success. We would eventually like to build a nice heifer barn and have a place for the better heifers, but we have a hill beside our house that our heifers actually spend the summer out on the hill. And it's all shaded with trees. It's I put the water at the top of the hill, the hay is down at the bottom of the hill, or vice versa. So the heifers are walking a lot of exercise. I think exercise is a big part of it. A heifer that's exercising, she's keeping toned up, she's staying dairy, she can handle the feed because she's exercising. If an animal's just in a box stall in a barn and you're feeding her, she'll tend to put on the weight. So I think exercise is a big part of it. I really do. Observation. You got to observe that animal every day. You got to check her to see if you think she's gaining weight too fast or if she's too dairy and you need to change a feeding program. And to me, observation, check your animal each day, take a look at her, you get to know your heifer, you get to know if she's healthy. If she looks a little bit sick, you got to ask somebody who knows what you got to do. Take her temperature, treat her with the right antibiotics. Observation is a big part of it. I think the feeding, of course, plays a big role. But not every heifer is the same. Not every breed's the same. For you people out there that have jerseys, you probably think that, well, they tend to get a little heavier quicker, and they do. So sometimes we have to separate our jerseys away from the Holsteins because the jerseys will actually gain weight a little quicker, and it's harder to get the weight off them. Also, just making sure they got clean water. Quite often, if they're on the pasture and they're drinking from a water tub, change the water often in the tub so it's fresh and clean. I think that's a big thing. A lot of you touched on ventilation. Ventilation is a big part of it. Now here we don't really have the facility for the ventilation for the show heifers, but we're on a mountain here where our farm is. So in the trees, there's a slight breeze all summer. And actually my heifers grow hair tremendously here on their top lines. And I think just because that we're using that to our advantage because we don't have the nice barn with the fans running on them. Also, nobody talked about this, and it's something that's important. There's nothing worse for a 4-H'er when they can't show their heifer because ringworm came on their heifer late in the show season. If you have ringworm on your farm, I would advise you to expose that calf to it early and young so it gets through it, because the younger they are, the less bad they get it. So our calves are in hutches, and quite often the wooden hutches, they get a spot of ringworm, and then they're kind of immune to it after. So I think that's something that is a little advice. If you can get it over with early in the season, it's a lot better than trying to keep your heifer from getting ringworm and then she breaks out right before the big show in the fall time. I think competition for heifers are good. They should be basically competing for feed. I think if you just have one heifer in a pen alone, she doesn't quite compete. And I think we have good luck if we do have them in the barn, in the box stall, or out in the pasture up in the hill in the trees. We always have more than one. We have 4 or 5 or 2 or 3 or sometimes up to 10 up on my hill, and they get around a hay feeder and they compete. It's almost like who can eat the most hay. So I think competition is a big thing for success on a heifer. If they're just by themselves, they get kind of stagnant. I call it staggy. They don't really have that drive to move around or to compete. And I think competition's big. I hope everyone can hear me here. Hello? Is everyone there?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're perfect. We just have ourselves muted so that we can hear you.
I was just making sure everybody was hearing me, that my internet didn't cut out. So the other thing I want to mention is when you're working with your heifer every day, that's a big part of the success. Working with them to an extent. My advice is take your heifer out for 10 minutes. Try to break her, try to lead her. Work with her for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, put her away. But you can do it again later in the day or the next day. And that heifer will look forward to going out. But if you go out with the intention you're going to break her to lead all in one day and you spend hours at it, you'll just sicken the heifer. She'll almost be mad at you. And so my advice is, my daughters always had great luck. They'd take them out for 10, 15 minutes in the evening, put them back. And those heifers are looking forward to getting out the next time. So that's something I think you can overwork your heifer as far as leading goes. So just small amounts. And as the season gets on, you can have them out a little longer because they start to know what's going on and they enjoy it. But don't sicken them on the start with over trying to work with them too much leading them. You got to know your heifer. If you got a heifer, it's got too much rib, too deep in the rib, opposed to one that doesn't have the rib, or too dairy opposed to one that's heavy, the feeding can be different. And so we kind of watch that. Sometimes you'll get what we call a calf with almost like a big gut on her, a really deep rib. Well, maybe you don't want that heifer on free choice hay all the time. And that is the kind of heifer that can, most of the time those heifers are very dairy, and they're heifers that can stand a little more push with maybe a little more of a grain or a protein and less hay, opposed to one that needs the rib. You can put the heifer that needs a rib on free choice hay with the other heifers, and the heifer will develop rib. Now, quite often we find when we're pushing our heifers to grow with the grain, they lack rib. They tend to, they get a little cover, they don't look as deep. So that's what I'm talking about, the observation. That's when that comes into effect. When you think that heifer is getting a little heavy, that's when you want to change it up a little. Maybe get her cut back on the energy. If you feed cracked corn, maybe get off the cracked corn and just a little more supplement, a little more protein with free choice hay. And you can alter a heifer quite a bit just by playing with the feed and changing them around. One thing that we do here, we notice that when we're working with our heifers, quite often you'll see them coming along really good, and then all of a sudden they start to go through stages and they don't look as good. That's when I'll change them. I'll put them in another pasture. I'll let them run out with a bunch in a big pasture, and a week later I'll bring them back and put them back in the same program, and those heifers change. It's amazing just what a change can do. So we got to remember, we say consistency. Yeah, consistency to the point where you can be too consistent and the heifer starts to just kind of get used to that one program, and she's kind of getting into a stage where she's maybe getting too much rib or she's pulling her top. And that happens more when they're in a barn in a box stall. Quite often you'll see a heifer's just being in there eating. She'll start to pull her top line, get too much belly. That's when you maybe want to get a little night pasture, a little place to get them out, kick them out and let them move. So these are all points to me that can make a big difference at the end of the year. One thing I can talk about too is probiotics. If you want to use performance or fast track, a little bit of that in their grain ration is good, but don't overdo it. But I do use that sometimes on heifers that I feel lack a little appetite. I think that can make a difference. Rinsing your heifers. I think rinsing your heifers is a big thing. We like to do it late in the day, just in the early evening in the summer when it's starting to cool down a little. We'll rinse them and then we'll put them back up in the trees, and those heifers usually respond well with the hair. But when you get into the heat of the summer and it's really hot and you have a black heifer, black Holstein heifer, it's hard to keep her hair. So when we wash them, we sometimes put conditioner in. And my daughters found certain conditioners they liked through the years, and boy, I thought they were crazy actually when they started doing that, and I saw a big difference. It really made a difference on those heifers to add a little conditioner to their hair. I mean, sometimes it's a little expensive, but if you want to have a success doing it, it's probably worth that little bit of expense to buy conditioner for them. I think clipping them is great, but in our setup here where they're outside a lot, we have to be careful because they'll sunburn. And there's nothing worse than when you come home from a show and you've had those heifers tight clipped and you throw them outside. We're really careful about that. We actually cover our heifers in baby powder. The white heifers get covered in baby powder. And we'll do it every day for a few days till they get exposed to the sun so they don't burn. Some people go and put sunscreen on them, but that's a lot of sunscreen on a heifer. So we use the baby powder. But I think sunburn can really throw you backwards on a heifer because it hurts her. Then she peels her skin and you've lost what you've gained. So for those of you who do a lot of 4-H shows in the summer, you got to be careful of that. Now, a lot of people don't put them outside. They just keep them in the barn so they don't sunburn. So that's fine. But in our situation, we have to watch that here. I'm just trying to think of a few other things that I want to talk about that goes into this. I think this isn't really on the feeding part, but I think for those of you with a show, pick a calf that goes with your size. If you're a big, tall young man showing a little junior calf jersey, you'll have a hard time probably in showmanship. It's really hard. If you want to get noticed in showmanship and do well, you should try to have a heifer that suits your size. And I think that's a big part of your success in showmanship. I guess you got to set your goal. If you want a calf that's going to do well in showmanship for you, sometimes you'll see this heifer, long neck, very stylish, looks like a great showmanship calf, but maybe doesn't quite have the middle to do well in conformation. Ideally, you want a heifer that's great for both. But some people put a little more emphasis on doing well in showmanship. Some people want to do a little more, do better in conformation classes. But ideally, you want a heifer that can be great for both. Not everybody has access to those kind of heifers. So I guess it's what you got to set your goal, what you're looking for. My daughters never put a lot of emphasis on having the biggest heifer, having the full age heifer. We've never worried about that here. We always feel have a heifer that is well made, because in general, the judges nowadays all around the world, we're looking for ideal conformation. So if your heifer's born middle of October, sure, you're maybe a month and a half younger than the full age September calves. But if she's good and she's fancy, she's going to get noticed. And I feel that actually my daughters have had great success. Alana won the Classic Grand Champion with the Jersey years ago with a heifer that was a young summer yearling Jersey. We've also had another summer yearling Jersey for another young lady that had reserve champion at the Scotiabank, and that heifer was a end of July heifer. So I think it's more important, if you like the way the heifer's made, the conformation, and she's big enough for her age, don't worry about her being the full age heifer. Pick the best heifer. That's my advice on that part. I feel that one little thing I'm going to throw into this kind of goes into showmanship a little bit, but I feel that when you're teaching your heifer to walk frontwards, you should teach a heifer to walk backwards. And that sounds crazy, but that heifer should know the halter so well that if you have to back her up and line up quick, you just have to push back in the halter and back she goes. So, I mean, my daughters, through the years, we've always had them teach our heifers how to go backwards as well as frontwards. And I think that's a little tip that can help you so much in showmanship.
Can I ask a little question there, Callum, on that topic?
Yeah.
So that has been a contentious, well, I shouldn't say contentious, but that's a question that comes up fairly regularly. And I don't know, you obviously attended the national judging conferences. Has there been talk on that, on whether it's, can you guys just unplug that for a minute? Sorry. Has there been talk on whether that, unplug it, Colin, please, now, thank you. Has there been talk on that, whether it's frowned upon, or is it okay if, when the kids are doing their half step, if they back up or not?
Well, I guess, to be honest with you, you always want to go ahead if you can. It looks nicer. A heifer going frontwards to set up. So if you've left yourself enough room to go frontwards to set up, it's better. But sometimes you'll get in a situation where there'll be 50 calves in the class or 40 calves in the class, and it's tight on the corner, and you don't have room to go ahead. So if your heifer knows how to step backwards quick and set up, you got to do it. So when you have a heifer who does do it, I don't think it's frowned upon if that's what you have to do. I mean, I think where it comes into effect is in a lineup where you get pulled in the middle and maybe your calf's pushed ahead on you. If you've got that calf taught to go backwards easily, she'll just go right back and set up again. So that's mainly what I'm talking about. But I think on the outside of the ring, it comes to your benefit as well. So.
Callum, maybe
yeah.
just before you move on, we did have a couple of questions come in on the chat box here.
Okay.
The first one is, where would a 4-H'er first notice that their calf is maybe getting too much feed?
Well, I guess that comes with practice and a little bit of experience, but your parents have grown up with it a lot for you kids too. So it's good to ask the advice of somebody that maybe has been used to showing their whole life. But you know, when you look at your heifer and you see that she's getting a little round over the shoulder, she's getting a little throaty, or a little thick through the thighs, it's a sign that you're maybe just a little too generous with the grain and they need a little more exercise or a little more protein. Some people have programs for their heifers, it's unreal, and they do a great job and they can keep those heifers from getting heavy. We have a little trouble sometimes with them getting heavy, and so we need to change it around. I mean, I've seen myself where I put the heifer out just on hay for 10 days, 2 weeks, just on hay, and then get her back and push her again. And we find that they do well that way. We'll change our program right around when we see a heifer getting that way, and she'll change. And then you can go back to pushing her again, and she'll sprout and she'll grow a little more. But it's mainly checking if you don't see the rib showing on them, or they're looking like they're just getting that little bit of cover throughout. That's when you got to jump on it before it gets so far that they get really heavy. A lot of people control their water. I prefer not to. I like to do it by exercise. So, but that's our situation. We're in a good situation where they can walk a lot and they go up in the hill, so we can do it by exercise. But a heifer that's in the barn all the time, it's hard because then they don't really have that opportunity to lose their weight by exercise. So then sometimes you got to do it by diet Some people do control the water. So it's whatever works in your situation that you have, I guess.
Excellent. And the other question that came in was, this is maybe a secret tip, but would you be willing to share with us which conditioners you've tried and which have worked?
Well, my daughter's right here, and I'm going to ask her right now, what's the best one? Resume conditioner. And they started to use that on their heifers in the middle of the summer when they rinse them at night. And I thought, oh, this is crazy. And I couldn't believe the difference in the hair of those heifers. It was incredible. So Tresemme is the one they like to use. Any other questions?
That's it at the moment, but
Okay.
so you can keep going, and
Okay.
if I get more, I'll jump in.
Yeah. The other thing that I want to talk about too is it's good to feed your heifers. Like ours run up on a hill, but quite often we had a brown Swiss heifer that wasn't a 4-H calf, but she was junior champion of Madison last year. She was a little bit finicky to get into the grain box and eat with the other ones. So we started feeding her in a tub and she got used to that feed tub. So we would open the gate, she'd run out into the driveway, eat out of her tub, and go back in the field when she was done. And that's the way we fed her all year. She just liked to eat out of her feed tub. So some people, when you go to a show, you feed in tubs. And I think that's a good way to do it. We try to put our heifers, at least get them used to eating out of feed tub before we go to shows. They hear the way situation we are in, they eat out of a grain box. But quite often, if you feed one individually, we'll catch her and she'll eat out of that tub. And I think that's really good to get the heifer used to that. So, also, I want to touch a little bit on the feed. Like we feed a lot of cracked corn to our heifers here, in the winter especially because it's high energy, and we find that helps them grow a lot, keeps the weight on the cold weather. But if you feed the cracked corn in the summertime, quite often those heifers put the weight on quite quickly. So we might change it up in the summer. We might go to a dairy ration, and or even a calf ration, but with high protein, and then top dress it with like a 40% or 44% protein. The thing you got to be careful on is the supplement or the protein, because if you feed too much of that, you can see it in your legs on your heifers. And by this, I mean, you can see the hocks sometimes will get fluid. It's because you're giving them too much protein. They'll just get a little fluid look in their hocks, or they'll get a little stiff even moving. Cut back on the protein. You got to be really careful on that. So that's something that we're really careful. We measure out our supplement or protein to the heifers. We don't just throw it all into them, because a heifer can gorge herself on that and put herself off quite bad. So you're dealing with a high protein. So you got to be careful of that. Also, I'm just looking what else I haven't touched on. I want to talk about, if you get a heifer, it's hard to break, hard to lead. She doesn't want to learn. Sometimes you're just ready to give up. And I'll give you a good story. I bought a jersey one time in the U.S. for my daughter, Alana. That was going to be her 4-H cat. And we got her home. And that was the most stubborn heifer we had ever had. But what a beautiful heifer. She was a tremendous heifer, but she would not lead. She wouldn't walk. She'd flip herself. She would just be stubborn. And Alana kept trying and trying for 2 weeks. And finally she said to me, she was quite young, said, you know, Dad, I think I'm going to have to give up and try another heifer. And I said, no, don't give up. Keep trying. Well, you're going to laugh at this story. We had a border collie here. My dad trained border collies. We had a really good dog. Her name was Leah. So I got the dog walking behind the heifer. And she would follow Alana in the cab. And every time the cab would stop, Alana would say, walk on, Leah. And Leah would go up and just give her a little nip down below the dew claw. And the heifer would start to walk. So that went on for quite a bit of the summer. The dog would follow her around. So we get to the first show, and the heifer gets in the ring, and she's going great, and she stops. And starts to not want to walk. And I see Alana talk to her heifer, and the heifer starts to walk. So what she was saying is, walk on, Leah, and the heifer would think the dog was there, and the heifer would walk. And that heifer was grand at the Scotiabank, and I think she won her showmanship with her as well. And so that heifer, she never gave up, but that was a good little trick. That heifer would know that voice command, and my daughter would say it. She even had judges ask her, what did you say to your heifer? So it's kind of funny, but that's, I guess a good point of that is don't give up. If you got a heifer, it's a little hard to lead, you'll find a way to get her to go. It is hard in showmanship if you got one that doesn't want to go, but when they're made so nice, sometimes you don't want to give up. You want to stay with that beautiful heifer and good conformation heifer. One thing I want to touch on is I think you can spoil your heifers. And by spoil them, I mean you play with them too much, you let them kind of jump around and butt you and play with you, and those heifers get spoiled. And so there's a fine line. The heifer's got to know you're the boss and respect you, but you got to let her know to trust you. But I would say after you're done lean her, pet her, and let her jump around and put her in the pasture. But when you're lean her, probably don't have her jumping around. Let her know you're the boss. She's got to lead well. And but there's a fine line. They can be spoiled, and everybody knows I had 4-H heifers and they become cows. They can be a real pain if they're spoiled as a cat. So we like to actually make sure we toughen the heifers up a little is another thing too. The heifer's always babied or by herself in a box stall. She tends to be kind of a suck. She just doesn't, she's used to everything being given to her, and she doesn't have to fight for her feed. So that's where competition comes in good. We like to put 3 or 4 heifers together, and they have to fight for their feed. They have to push each other around, because I think competition is really important. And when they get to a show, they're tied beside other heifers. And if they're really never being with another animal, just always by himself in that box stall, they'll just kind of stand there and pull back on the halter when the other heifer challenges them. So I think you got to make sure they're tough enough that they've had to rough it a little bit. They've had to, not just baby them every day. And that's my point, I guess, is it's nice to take good care of them, but you can maybe overdo it a little bit. So, any questions at this point?
If anyone has questions, they can, again, type them into the chat box, or you can just ask them directly on the screen. You just have to unmute yourself.
I have one.
Yeah.
What if the calf is the one that's the pushy one and is gaining weight because she's pushing everybody out of the way?
Yeah, well, that one you don't have to worry about. You can get her away from the rest and control her feet a little more, because she'll do it when she gets back into them. And to be honest with you, a heifer that does that, they'll usually fill really well for you at the show. They'll always have a good fill. The ones that are kind of finicky, they're hard to get them to fill out at the show. So, but then you got to be careful. You don't want one that's so pushy she'll hurt the other ones. So we'll let the pushy one be in with the ones that are kind of timid to get the other ones to toughen up a little. But you got to watch, because if they start going backwards, you got to get that one out of the pen and just, put her by herself or with one that's a little tougher, I guess you could say. So it's a fine line there, but I think that's a good question, very good question. So.
Yeah. And another question just in the chat box here, Callum. What can we do if the calf is very pushy when we are leading them?
Well, that's where I say you got to kind of be the boss. And I know as a showmanship judge, you don't want to see the kids hauling off and slapping their heifer on the nose or tapping them on the nose, because you want them well trained. But that's when you got to do it at home. When the heifer's pushing you around, you just give her a tap on the nose and let her know that you're the boss. you know, she's got to lead good for you. You want her to respect it that way. And then after you're all done, let her know you're her friend and pet her and play with her a little and turn her back in her pen. But I think some heifers are like that, and you really got it's. And to be honest with you, it happens more for us in the Jerseys. They like to be a little bossy or a little stubborn, and it's just a little hard sometimes. But I guess it's just to let them know you're the boss, to respect you, and because if you just let them keep doing it, they'll start to know that they can do it. So we'll tap them on the nose. I mean, we don't get rough. We just tap them and let them know you're the boss, and that's it. You know.
I see all the Jersey people nodding here on the line, Callum.
Yeah.
I've
well,
got another one there, Jen. Sorry, that kind of goes with the one that Stella asked. Callum, we had a couple kids in our club send a question in earlier in the week for you, wondering if you could give us a brief overview of kind of how you organize your pack at a show, like with having the different breeds on the pack, and how you go about like, because obviously at the bigger shows they don't all show same day, and how you go about how you kind of feed, because you are typically one of the larger strings at some of these shows. So how do you handle that, and how do you they just kind of wanted an overview of how you feed your pack at a show, essentially how you do chores. And then Stella kind of expanded there with her question. She asked, is there anything you do differently kind of a week or so before you head out to a show at home in terms of feeding?
Well, we try to kind of have them on the program at home before we go a little bit, that they're used, like I'll even try to bring my own hay that the heifers are used to eating, to try to keep them on that same hay they love to eat. We have a little shed off our barn. We have a little pack, and quite often we take them in there and tie them up on rings like they'd be at a show. We've done that over the years, or they'll be tied in there and they'll eat from a tub and drink water from a tub with a hose. And then just to get them like acclimated to what they'd be going through at the show. So that's a good question. I think it's good to get your heifer used to it, because if in our situation where they run up on the hill, if we grab one and just take her and tie her up and she's not being tied at the show, quite often they'll go backwards. So I think it's great to have a place where you can put them, get them used to being tied up, getting used to tying them by the neck with a chain or a strap, however you tie them, two-way tie, getting used to being beside other heifers, drinking from a tub, eating from a tub. I think that's really important. At the show, depending the breeds, we try to tie our breeds kind of together, because quite often the show days are different, or even at 4-H show, the junior calf jerseys or jerseys might go first, or the Holsteins might, you know, so we try to kind of get the black and whites or red and whites, the color, or the jerseys, or the brown Swiss, or whatever breeds we have, kind of, if there's two of them kind of together. I know it doesn't make your pack look as nice because they're not as even in size, but for feeding reasons, it's very practical. So that's kind of what we try to do.
Perfect. And another couple more questions for you here. What kind of supplements do you feed?
Well, we not to say one's better than the other. I mean, I've used the 44% top dress from Gain that we actually top dress for cows. We use that for the heifers too, for a top dress supplement. And we also have used the Pick Plus from Purina. It's a 40%, and it's even a cow top dress too. We've used that for the heifers as well. I mean, everybody has their own sources they use, but we like using the 44 quite a bit from Gain, to be honest, but we've had good results with both.
But
that's what I said, you gotta be careful on that because the protein's high, so you gotta really regulate how much you give them.
And the next question is, do you have any tips for a calf that is well behaved at home, but won't walk in the ring? or a calf that bucks in the ring?
Yeah, well, that's quite often the way it goes. You get them lean perfect at home. They get to a show and it's like, why did she lead good? And all of a sudden she's not. Well, if you got 4 or 5 kids showing, you should have them all out going in the circle. So that calf's used to going around with other calves. Because quite often, if you're leading your calf alone at home and there's no other calves, well, and she's going beautiful. But when she gets in the ring and she sees the other heifers, she all of a sudden starts to buck and jump around because she sees the other heifers. It's because she's not used to it. So if you got a chance where some other kids can pull some out, lead them around, you can go around, that can help. And my daughter just chipped in and told me, should lead them inside and outside. That's true, because they lead them outside here, and quite often they'll lead them in the barn. Just kind of like almost being in a show ring a little bit. So they get used to being inside a building leading. If you got a heifer that side steps, and she always consistently goes sideways, my daughters will take them right beside the gutter in the barn. When the heifer sidesteps, she steps into the gutter, and they'll go up one side and down the other till the heifer learns to go straight. And just little tricks like that that can help you quite a bit. So. Any other questions? I guess I want to say also.
Sorry, Callum, just before you go on, I think Emma, you have a question?
Oh yeah. So whenever you like make them happy before like they go in the ring and then they're finally in the ring, then they're just acting stubborn and just start laying them down. How do you make them permanently happy so they don't get all crazy and stuff?
Well, that's a good question. And every animal has different attitudes, just like people. So sometimes they're hard to get them to behave or to cooperate. But if you've worked with your heifer at home and the heifer knows you, there might be something you do at home that she likes, like just kind of tickle her jaw a little bit or something, just to kind of get her to, to respond to you. Some people just talking to your heifer a little bit, not loud where everyone hears you, but she might respond to you that way. So it's just little things you learn at home from your heifer. My daughter, she trains her calf here that she'll scratch a heifer's shoulder to switch her feet. And the heifer learns just to switch her rear feet from the one scratch. One little rub on her shoulder on the opposite side. And she'll do it twice so the heifer knows to switch back. And that's how well she trains her calves. So a calf, it's amazing what you can teach them. Animals are smart, so they learn very easily.
Mm-hmm.
Good question.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
A few more questions. Well, people are reacting to your gutter comment, so we must have a lot of sidesteppers, because I have 2 people asking, what do you do if you don't have a gutter? Well,
just go along a fence line, electric fence line. That'll really teach a heifer. And they'll learn not to sidestep. Just somewhere where if they sidestep, they get a little bit of a shock, like a little bit of a step in the gutter or a little shock from the fence, or so they learn not to do that. Or a wall, just on a wall on a building and go along the wall, and they can't sidestep, because that's a big thing with heifers quite often. Now, sometimes they sidestep because the way you're holding your halter, or you're turning the head a little bit. So those kind of heifers, sometimes you almost got to keep the nose towards you if they're sidestepping to the right, and then eventually work them out of it to go get used to leading. Quite often, if you let their nose go towards the show side, they'll swing the rear ends the other way. So sometimes it's just working with that animal on the head carriage, how you lead that animal. You can help quite a bit.
All right. Any other questions for Callum?
You're muted, go.
Okay. How do you
What do you look for when you buy heifers to make the cow?
That's a good question. Very good question. Well, I like the same kind of heifers as I like cows, to be honest with you. And I want them feminine. I want them a long dairy neck. I like a heifer with a good rib structure, not the big, deep, gutty rib, but enough rib structure, but very youthful. I want a heifer to look youthful, like she's got a lot of room to grow and stay angular. Good feet and legs. That's probably one of the most important things, and with the rump. I mean, it's kind of, I look at that and I'll say, boy, that heifer looks like she's going to turn into a great cow. And quite often they do. And you're going to think I'm nuts, but I even look at the udder promise on a calf. I'll look underneath, and if she looks nice underneath, I'll say, oh, she's got a chance to turn into something. Where if she's got long teeth and so looks really average underneath, I'll steer away from her just because I don't want to take that chance that she won't turn into a good cow. And not every time you can be right, but you can have a pretty good idea about that. Good question. The one thing I want to say that I think's really good is when you're training your heifers, you should learn them, before you ever take them out, teach them how to be tied up with a halter. Start by just like a nylon halter in the barn, about the height you would be leading them. But don't tie them up and just take off and go for dinner, because quite often a heifer hasn't been tied up will end up really doing something silly or hanging herself or trying to fall down. And we'll tie them up where we can see them for 20, 25 minutes and then take them for a little walk. They'll fight a little and let them go, and then do that the next day, and eventually that breaks them. Some people like to put them behind a wagon, go really slow to break them, and I think that's a great way to break one that's really hard to get her to lead smooth. If you have a good speed on the wagon, tractor wagon, and you just go slow, have her tied quite tight, she'll break the lead at that speed, and that's a good way to break a heifer as well. But most kids just do it by hand, and that's the ideal way. But sometimes you get a more difficult animal that's hard to teach.
Another couple of questions coming in here for you. So the first one is, what's the youngest you can trim feet?
Well, to be honest with you, when the calves are basically weaned off milk, if they're on a straw pack and they've been running on straw, you pull them off and you see those toes are really long. I've had my hoof trimmers trim them at 4 months, even like at 4 months old, just to shape the feet. And you can really change a heifer so much at that young age to make sure her pasterns and everything stays good. Where if they go for 6 months, 8 months running on that straw pack, and you pull them off and their feet are so long, they're walking back on their dew claws, it takes quite a few trimmings to get them right. And some will never quite get good enough if you're not careful. So I think it's really important to get them trimmed, but it's also very important to have somebody that knows what they're doing. Like you can try to do them yourself, but if you're doing the wrong thing, you can make it worse. So ask advice to somebody who knows what they need to get done to get their feet trimmed. Don't just say, oh, I think I can make her better and knock her toes off, but not change it. The angle underneath, sometimes it can make it worse.
Another question here, Callum. With the different personalities of breeds, how do you change the hold on the halter? Or do you change the hold and adjust?
Well, that's a really good question. Jerseys, you hold them too tight quite often. They'll want to flip themselves. They don't like you holding that halter so tight. Our experience with our jerseys, and not so much in 4-H, quite often we'll give them a little, our hand won't be quite as close to the jaw. They'll have a little more freedom. And when they go to, they do that little butt with their head, we'll let them kind of do it, and they'll come right out of it and go lead well again. And where if you hold them tight, they'll flip themselves in the ring. How many times have you seen a show where you'll see the Jersey calf is the one that flips over? So they just got a little more attitude. We love our jerseys. I grew up with jerseys, but they do have that little more attitude sometimes. So that's what we notice a little bit. Sometimes you get one that just leads beautifully, and it's fun when that happens. Holsteins, I guess every calf can be like every individual. They all have their own personalities, but it's a matter of just, hopefully if you want a good showmanship heifer, you're gonna have one that doesn't do that, because quite often if they do that, it'll be right at the wrong moment when you're in the ring, and that's frustrating. But I think just working with them and trying to get them taught that that's what you want, that you want them to go smooth, and just keep working with them, and maybe you'll break them. But there's really no solution for that. It's just sometimes the attitude of the heifer. One thing I want to touch on here is heat cycles of your heifers. That's really important. Watch your heifers that are, like when they get up to senior calves, summer yearling, they'll start coming into heat. Know your heat cycles, know when your show dates are. Sometimes you'll need to synchronize a heifer so she's not in heat at the show. So that's something we really watch closely, especially going to the big shows. When the heats are doing those heifers, we'll write it down, and we'll know to, if 3 weeks from today she shows at a show, well, a week later we'll give her a shot of Estromate, bring her back into heat to set her off from that show. So that's something that's very important.
Couple more questions for you here, and I see Emma's got one as well. So how long do you keep your calves on milk for?
Well, we used to be kind of old school and had them on milk a long time. And to be honest with you, they do well, but they get the throat. They get a little heavy through their throat quite often. Those calves are drinking a lot of milk. So we now try to get our calves off no later than 2 months. Like we'll try to be at 2 months, they'll be weaned. Maybe 5 weeks, even 6 weeks, we'll be starting to wean them, depending on the calf. If we got a calf, it's just, she needs to be a milk longer, we'll keep her a milk longer. But the one that's done really well and she's heavy and it's time to get her off, we'll wean her a little earlier. So anywhere from 6 weeks to 8 weeks, kind of here's what we do, depending on the heifer. And
the next question, Callum, is how do you try to make that big heifer take smaller steps?
That is practice, practice, and practice. That's really what it is. And I mean, yeah, like holding back with your hand on the shoulder, just a little to guide her to not take that large step can help. But it's a lot of practice to get a heifer that, because there's some that just want to take longer strides. That's why sometimes we like to tie them on a wagon, and they can't really, if you're going slow enough and they're tight enough, they can't really, they kind of got to go with the flow. So that can help a lot. But I think it's just mainly practice and just trying to teach them that. That's, my daughters have had calves that want to take big steps, and you'll see they'll go through it, and finally they'll get them so they're doing the half step, not that big long stride. But it's a lot of practice.
And Emma, over to you. I think you have another question.
Yes. So, like, whenever it's been like a long, hot day, and then the calves are starting to get a little lazy, and they're out in the field, and you need to herd them in. Do you have a specific thing that you like to herd them in with?
Well, to be honest with you, our calves will. We just call them up at the pasture here, and we have a little pail, and we jiggle a little grain in the pail, and they'll come running right over to the gate. And they're friendly enough. If you've been leading them, you can just slip the halter on and lead them into the barn or go rinse them or whatever you're doing with them. So we just shout. The heifers will just, and they come running. Because they're worked with. I mean, the more, I guess, showing is the more you work with them, the better you're going to do. And it's not all, it's basically through the whole season, not just the day before you go to that show. So if your heifers are worked with a lot at home, they'll come running right up to you. Even the one that's been nervous on the start, quite often they'll break and they'll want to be caught. And they'll want to, because they know sometimes they're going in for a rinse or going in for a little feed or whatever. So, yeah, good question.
And Kennedy's wondering, do you have any tips for what you should do if your heifer goes into heat for the first time ever, a couple of days before the show?
A couple
How do you
days.
handle-
Well, if she's in heat a couple days before the show, quite often we'll make sure we give them fertilene or Factrel just to make sure they ovulate so they don't develop a cyst or get cystic. So that's something when they're in heat, you can give them a shot to make sure they ovulate, and then that's about all you can do. But if you have a heifer comes in heat at the show, the only solution or trick I can give you is have some Vicks Vapor Rub in your show box and cover her nostrils, rub it on her nose and her nostrils, and quite often that heifer will behave herself in the ring because just the smell of the Vicks, I don't know why it works, but it works well.
And a follow-up question on the calves in heat. Do you try to walk the heifer when they are in heat, or should you try to walk them?
Well, if you're at a show, you have to, but if you're at home, no, usually we'll just skip that day. We'll make sure they're in a safe place where they're not going to be another heifer jumping them all day long, and just wait and go lead them the next day. I think you're better to not. You'll only frustrate yourself quite often if they are.
Okay. And Stella's got two questions for you. So the first one is, do you track all of your heifer's progress?
Well, we do kind of. The ones are showing. And that comes with the observation. Basically, we look at them every day, and we say, well, that heifer, she's growing really well, or that one's not growing enough. And we'll catch her. We'll even measure them to see how much they've grown in a month. If they haven't grown at all, we know we're not giving them maybe enough push in the feed to get the growth. So yeah, that's a good question, but we do catch them and measure them and see how they're coming along growth wise.
And the other question Stella had for you was, if you were going to spend money on something as a 4-H'er, is there a product that you would suggest they invest in more?
A product for feeding or for whatever?
Yeah, I think if you were going to spend money on something, what would it be? And actually Stella's followed up and said yes for feeding.
For feeding? Well, just if you don't like the hay you got at home, or the hay's not quite right, or it's got too much alfalfa in it and the manure's a little loose, spend a little money, get maybe a little bit of good hay for a while to make sure she's on a good Timothy hay or a hay that you like to feed the heifer. I think that's quite important. So.
All right, and I think Emma has one more question for you.
Yes. Whenever we're doing like our big clipping, because you have to clip them before the show, the day before, do you have a specific, like whenever I'm clipping their legs, like I either cut it like not enough or too short, and then I have to blend it in with their whole body? And do you have a specific blade number you like to use?
Well, to be honest with you, I haven't done a lot of the clipping for years now. I always have my daughters do a lot of it or whatever, but we use the littler clippers on the legs with not too sharp a blade. To be honest with you, we don't want them to be pink. If it's a Holstein heifer and she's white and you clip the legs so short, her legs are pink, I don't think that looks good. So we like them to be enough hair that it doesn't look like you're right on the skin, but you don't want her to have hair that's long hair that looks untidy. So it's mainly the breeds, like Jerseys, you wouldn't notice as much as you would a Holstein that's maybe a white calf. And that's not only for the legs, for the body. If you got a white Holstein calf and you skin her off with the tight blades, she'll be pink and she won't look as good. So we'll use a blade that's a little longer on a white heifer quite often, opposed to a black heifer.
Great questions. I've got a couple that are going to, people are asking showmanship type questions. So as a judge, what makes show people stand out for you?
A showman that goes in unison with the heifer. They're one unit, step for step, smooth, just very relaxed, and heifer just goes step for step with that showman. That's the number one thing I look for when I'm judging showmanship, is I want to see that they look like one unit moving around the ring.
And that question was from Madison, and the next one is from Sarah, and she's wondering, as a judge, what is the one thing that catches your eye when a calf enters the ring?
Well, a calf, it's well presented. If I'm doing showmanship, a calf is well presented. Like a calf, it's got the, you know, she looks healthy, she's shining, she's clean, she's well clipped, she's everything. It just jumps at you. Wow, that showman's taking a lot of time to work with that calf and leading really well. If that's what in showmanship. A long stylish neck. Sometimes I know when you're judging showmanship, you're looking at how the calf leads, but a calf with that long dairy neck will catch a judge's eye. And the show that it's just nice when you're a showman and you got that kind of calf, opposed to one with a really short neck. It just seems to stand out a little more.
All right. Any other questions?
Have you ever fed straw to heifers, or do you just exercise?
We have, but not often. Sometimes when they get late fall and we get on a time where we're going to be short to get them into shape for a show, we will put them on straw if they're heavy, or if it's crazy how heifers will eat straw. You think they wouldn't, but after a while they get onto it, they'll develop a lot of rib on straw quite often. So I have done it. But quite often we try to work with the exercise and good hay. But I have fed heifer straw for a week or two before a show.
Christian may be checking up on you. I think you have one of his family's cows down at your place these days.
Yeah, that's right. A good one.
Any other questions for Callum? Anybody want to speak up or type anything into the chat box? We'll take any last questions before we let Callum do some closing remarks for us. Here's a question for you. This is a tough one. Everybody puts everybody on the spot. So bulls that you like right now. So maybe your Jersey and your Holstein bull preferences.
Wow, that's a good question. You know, I guess I would say that over the years, it's been easy to find the bulls that leave the fancy show calves. Years back, now there's such a selection of bulls that it's hard to follow a pattern of which bulls are maybe right now jumping out with the fancy show heifers. But I mean, I don't think there's any one bull. I think there's numerous bulls you can use. I mean, last 2 years there's been some nice Jacoby or Jacoby, however you want to say his name, heifers in the ring showing. There's been some nice Douglas heifers in the ring showing in the Holsteins. Years ago, you had the Goldwins. You had the Dundees before that. There's bulls that'll leave great heifers. Dempsey, there's a lot of good Dempseys. These are older bulls now, unstoppable. There's some really good unstoppable calves showing now. We got quite a selection of bulls that we can use that way. Jerseys, I've had a lot of luck with the Rapid Bay Gorgeous Sons, a lot of luck with those Gentrys and Getaways, and those ones have been really good for us. We've had some really good Joels from CMEX. We've had some good hired guns. Hired gun will have some really stylish calves and heifers. So, there's a good selection now with the way we have selection of bulls. We have good selection on many bulls. So I wouldn't say there's that one bull that's doing it like maybe back in the day when Goldwyn was dominating or Dundee. I can't say there's that one bull right now in the Holsteins that's doing that. But I can say there's a lot of bulls. Blondin have a Thunderstorm, a bull coming out. Boy, I've seen some really fancy calves by Thunderstorm. I think he's going to make some really good heifers. I'm not trying to promote any one unit or anyone, just the calves in general. I've seen the bull we can't use up here anymore, Altitude. But I have some Altitude calves here that when the semen was up here, tremendous calves. We got a good selection of bulls we can still pick from. So I think there'll be a lot of good calves come out by various bulls.
And another question for you here, Callum. We often hear judges talk about a balanced calf. What do you mean by a balanced calf?
Well, proportionate all the way through. Like you want a calf, it's got enough length of body, but enough depth of body. A calf, it just looks like she blends in all parts. Long neck, just all of it goes together. It's just she's tremendously balanced, and quite often those balanced heifers make a balanced cow. And I think it all goes with the rib structure, the blending of parts all the way through, how angular she is, how straight on her top she is. It's just everything goes together. A heifer, it's very tubular, doesn't look balanced compared to one that's got a little more of a rib to her. So and that's when I judge, I talk a lot about balance. And I think it's a heifer, it's proportioned all the way through just correctly.
All right. And Emma, I think I see your hand up again. So
yeah.
Over to Emma.
We don't plant wheat or oats or anything, and I show a Jersey, and it's like I haven't picked it out yet, but I'm going to show another Jersey this year. And we don't feed it barley because we don't want its stomach to turn, but because usually we just feed it hay, of course, and other things. And then, like, whenever we mix the pellets in with the corn, would it be okay to put a little bit of barley inside of that?
I've never really worked with barley too much with my heifers, but I think if it's something you're used to doing, and yeah, I think a little bit would be fine. I'm not really that used to feeding barley to them, so I'm not really accustomed to know what to tell you with that. So.
That's fair enough. Sarah has a question for you. Can you give us any tips if your calf does look tubular? What do you do?
Well, sometimes that's the structure of the animal, and you can help that by just hay, lots of hay, good quality first cut hay, changing the hay up. I think that's sometimes the animal, it's a conformation, and you can't make that heifer have the big barrel if she's tubular because she doesn't have the rib structure. But some heifers do develop more rib. I guess a lot of it is enough dry feed, enough dry hay opposed to silage. You don't want to be feeding them too much silage if they're tubular, so make sure they're on dry hay. Beet pulp can help develop the rib structure as well. So for me, just really good quality first cut hay. And a lot of times when you're pushing those heifers on grain, they don't eat as much hay. So sometimes if that heifer's got some weight on her, it's good to get her off the feed and just on almost just hay for a couple of weeks. And you can see how they can put on a lot of rib, develop a lot of frame.
And a follow-up question, when will you introduce beet pulp to a calf?
We do it quite early, like depending on the heifer, but we like to get them onto the beet pulp at least a couple weeks before we show a little bit so they're used to it. If we need to give them beet pulp, they know what it is when you get to the show. We don't just wait and start them at the show because quite often they won't eat it. So, but then there is heifers that have been extremely dairy to the point where they're almost frail. And I think beet pulp's good for them at home. Keeps a little weight on them, a little body condition on them. So it depending on the animal, but definitely get them used to it before you go to the show, quite a ways ahead.
How long before a calf goes into the ring do you give them beet pulp?
That's depending on the heifer again. If you have a heifer needs a lot of rear flank or rear rib, and she's not doing it with just a hay, hours before, like 4 or 5 hours before. We start early. If that's the way we got, if they're not going to do it with just hay. If you got a heifer, it's very, very round in her rib, but not super deep. You maybe don't, it depends on that animal, how they handle it, but you need to get it to the bottom. You might even start in the middle of the night, just giving her a little beet pulp to get it down as deep as you can in the belly. So, but if you got one that's super deep, but doesn't have a lot of spring to her rib, quite close to the showtime, and it might just help you with a little more spring, but doesn't get to the bottom so much. So it depends on the animal.
All right, I see lots of people taking notes here, but Emma, back to you. But maybe last question from our crowd, but if anyone else wants to type one into the chat, we can go with one more after that. So, back over to Emma.
Before you like try them with something new, how can you tell, well, like before you give it to them, how would you be able to know if they're allergic to it or not, if like before they give a reaction to it?
You really don't until you try something. So that's a good question, young lady, because if you're going to a show, we always try to have some antihistamine with us to give the animal if she goes into having an allergy. So that's something that's good to carry in the show box of well-being for an animal. If she's allergic to something at the show, that she can get a shot to help her if she needs it. I mean, sometimes it can save an animal's life if they're severely allergic to something. There's no time to have a vet. So it's probably a good thing to have as a club in your show box is antihistamine, just to be safe, you know, because you never know when one could have an allergy.
And a question here coming in on the chat box. What do you use to take all the top line spray out after the show?
That's a good question. There's all kinds of products. You can buy the products that they sell that you put in the top line. Some people use mineral oil. Some people use rubbing alcohol. That works very well, but it dries them out a little bit. So you got to make sure you rinse it out. And that's when the conditioner comes in good. We'll use rubbing alcohol quite often, but then we'll put conditioner on the tops after just to make sure they don't dry out too much.
All right. Last chance for questions. I don't want to cut anybody off, but we've taken a lot of Callum's time.
How often do you wash heifers? Like every night or something?
Yeah, we like to not use soap every day because that dries their skin out too. You know, quite often when you wash them with soap, you're washing the essential oils out of their hair, and that's when a heifer will get mites. You notice when you go to a show, you don't have trouble at home with the mites. You go to a show and all of a sudden the hocks get mites in their hocks, and that's because we're washing them with soap every day, and we're washing the oils out, and the oils in their skin is what keeps the mites from entering. So when there's no oils, the mites get in there. So we try not to use too severe of a soap every day. At home, we just basically rinse them. Maybe once a week, we wash them with soap, like Orvis, or sometimes we'll just use sunlight soap, easy on them, or we'll use Orvis once in a while. But we try not to go with the soap too often. It's strong. Like Orvis is really good, but it could be it could dry them out a little. So once a week, we'll use soap at home maybe on those heifers and rinse them otherwise with water, just, at nighttime, as long as they're not filthy. I mean, if they're filthy, you're going to wash them. But.
Good question. Sarah's wondering, what kind of black spray do you use for top lines?
The fitters all have, some like black finisher, some like black magic. Everybody has their preference. The big thing is try to get one that and when you're spraying them, to make sure they don't get their white tail flicking around in it. And on a hot, humid day, you go to the ring and your tail's all black. So something that doesn't run too much on the top, that they're going to get their tail. Yeah, my daughter just spoke up. Black finisher, but use a blower to make sure it dries before that tail gets into the top line.
Excellent. Well, I think we'll maybe cut off the questions there, Callum, or you might be here all night. Did you want to share with us any closing comments?
Well, no, I just, it's really been great talking to y'all. And whenever you see me at a show, any of you kids, don't hesitate to come up and ask, because I love working with kids in the 4-H and answering questions. Or if you need some advice and I'm at that show, don't be scared to talk to me, because I love that when kids come up and ask. So, and it's been one piece of advice I want to tell you kids, and I'm quite old now. I think every day of my life, I learn something. Something, maybe it's not about animals, it can be about something, but almost every day of your life, you learn something. So listen to people and take in advice, because you'll learn something new every day. And that's something that you can apply to any part of your life, but to cows especially. I've learned things from so many people over the years, little tricks or little things that you feed them, or just things you do that I didn't know. So you'll find as you get older, you'll notice, wow, I didn't know that, and I'm quite old. So every day you'll learn something.
Excellent. That's fantastic advice. So Sarah Campbell, I'm going to turn it over to you now, and I think you have some words for Callum.
On behalf of the Frontenac Leeds, Peterborough, Carleton, Dundas, and Dundas 4-H clubs, I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your night to join our Zoom call and share your knowledge with us on the process of feeding, growing, and caring for your 4-H animal.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Excellent.
And
Well,
if
thank you, Callum.
down our way, stop it and see us.
I think everybody appreciates the invite, and just so you know, there's about 50 4-H'ers on the line, so you may have a lot of hellos next year at the Royal when we see you all there.
It's too bad we're in the situation we are this year, but this is a great thing to do for the kids, and still we can't maybe meet in person, but I think you guys are onto something really good.
Yeah, we've been learning a lot, and we have our fingers crossed we're going to get to show later this year. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, let's hope it works out.
So we'll let you sign off now. We just have a few more things to do to finish off our meeting, but thanks again so much for joining us.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. Good night.
Thanks, Callum.
Yeah, thanks. We'll see everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.